Who or what is writing the script for your holographic 3D total immersion movie? Who or what is your director, screenwriter, producer? The best answer quantum physicists have come up with so far is consciousness. Here's how Dr. Amit Goswami puts it.
Quantum physics enables us to see directly that we can make sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. World is made of consciousness, world is consciousness, consciousness is the ground of being. Quantum physics makes this as clear as daylight, because quantum physics shows you clearly that science, quantum mathematics, which is, in our belief, the most fundamental mathematics, most accurate mathematical description of nature that we have discovered. This mathematics shows us clearly that the movement of objects are describable only in terms of possibilities, not the actual events that happens in our experience. Quantum physics calculates only possibilities. But if we accept this, then the question immediately comes, who, what chooses among these possibilities to bring the actual event of experience? So we directly, immediately see that consciousness must be involved. Consciousness must be the ground of being, of which objects are part, but not all of it. And these objects then can be described as waves of possibility, and quantum physics succeeds in giving this description very accurately and gives probabilities so that we can do science on the basis of it whenever there is a large number of objects and large number of events. But when you speak of individual objects and individual events, then this very intriguing choice, the word choice by consciousness, out of these possible events, the actual event of experience comes in. And so, for the first time, science encounters free will. Consciousness is free because there is no mathematical description of the subject in our science. Only objects can be described mathematically, and only to the extent that there are possibilities. The question still remains paramount: who is the chooser? And when we see that, then we see that the chooser is free. There is freedom of choice. And of that freedom of choice comes our actual experience.
Quantum physics enables us to see directly that we can make sense of the world only if we base the world on consciousness. According to Dr. Goswami, consciousness is the thing that chooses certain specific wave frequencies from unlimited possibilities in the field and downloads them to a human brain to create its holographic experience. So we are going to call this the consciousness model. We had the field model, the holographic universe model, and now we have the consciousness model. I want to be clear that this is not a belief system. There is a very big difference between a belief system and a model. A model is something you build or create based on the scientific evidence you have to date to test a theory to see how well it works. A scientific model is designed to be challenged to see how it performs when applied. On the other hand, a belief system is often formed in contradiction to the evidence at hand and cannot withstand testing and challenging. It's something you're emotionally invested in, attached to, and depend on. In fact, a belief system tries to avoid being tested or challenged at all costs, for fear it might fall apart. And then what would you do? With a model, if it doesn't work, you simply go back to the drawing board and try again. In other words, you're not invested or attached in any way to the outcome of a model, emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, as you are with a belief system. So, let's take a look at this consciousness model. First, you should know that not all quantum physicists agree with this consciousness model, because you can't study consciousness scientifically, as Dr. Goswami pointed out. Instead, they have proposed many other theories. But we are going to follow the vast majority who do use consciousness as the best answer. For example,
quantum physics says something about the role we human beings play in the universe. It says that consciousness is playing a role. It says there's a secret underground that seems to be affecting the reality we live in, and that this reality we live in is not at all what it appears to be.
Matter is not what we have long thought it to be. To the scientist, matter has always been thought of as sort of the ultimate in that which is static and predictable. We like to think of space as empty and matter as solid. But in fact, there is essentially nothing to matter whatsoever. It's completely insubstantial. The most solid thing you can say about all this insubstantial matter is that it's more like a thought. It's like a concentrated bit of information.
At its ultimate level, say in M theory or string theory, reality is not solid. It's mostly empty space. And whatever solidity it has seems more to resemble a hologram picture rather than material, harsh, solid reality. It's a shimmering reality that seems to be very susceptible to the power of thought.
What is the relationship between consciousness and material reality, whether or not the material world can actually be derived from a consciousness reality, or whether consciousness itself could even be the fundamental stuff of the universe, so to speak, instead of the cold dark matter or the other aspects of matter that physicists have been looking for. Maybe it has something more to do with consciousness, and in that regard, then we really can think about the universe as being more a state of consciousness, or more inundated with consciousness, much more so than the material reality that we normally look at.
If you put it that there is an intangible world that affects the tangible world of our experience, and if you then say that's what quantum mechanics says, and granted that's a fair way of trying to put into English something which is very, very difficult to grasp, but it then will lead quite naturally to the conclusion that quantum mechanics says that there is a spiritual world that makes this choice, that there's another world that is intangible, that affects and influences the physical world. That intangibility, however, is itself the bedrock of physical reality. It may be intangible, but it is, and we can't really say what it is or why it's there, but it is in fact the most fundamental feature of matter. So you could say, well, if it's a feature of matter, that's not intangible. Matter is the most tangible of things. So, I mean, these are word games. The fact of the matter is that the matter is not what we have long thought it to be.
There were some very interesting statements in that video. Let's briefly review a few of them. Fred Alan Wolf said, "Quantum physics says that consciousness is playing a role in the universe. It says that there is a secret underground that seems to be affecting the reality we live in." Notice the word affecting. Effect with an E means to achieve something and cause it to happen, or create, whereas affect with an A means to influence. So Fred Alan Wolf was saying, it says that there is a secret underground that seems to be affecting or creating the reality we live in. Then Dr. Jeffrey Satinover said, quantum mechanics says that there is a spiritual world that makes this choice, that there is another world that is intangible that affects and influences the physical world. Notice that Dr. Satinover goes one step further than Fred Alan Wolf when he says that consciousness both effects or creates and influences the physical world. Then Dr. Andrew Newberg wondered whether the material world can actually be derived from a consciousness reality, or whether consciousness itself could even be the fundamental stuff of the universe. So, the simplest and best answer to the question, who or what is choosing certain specific wave frequencies from the field and downloading them to a human brain to be converted into holograms to become the reality we see and experience is consciousness. So what goes in place of the laser gun? The answer, according to this model, is, no, not Ed Harris, is consciousness. Consciousness is what is choosing specific wave frequencies from the field to download to a human brain to create its holographic 3D total immersion movie. Now, clearly, this is not a linear process as these graphics make it appear to be, but that's the limitation of two-dimensional images. I wish I had a hologram of this to show you. What probably is closer to the truth is something like this in 3 dimensions. And it might even be that consciousness and the field are more intertwined. Be that as it may, are we all agreed? Consciousness is what chooses the specific wave frequencies from unlimited possibilities in the field that it wants and downloads them to a human brain, which then converts them into space-time particles, and out pops our holographic reality. Wonderful. Question answered. Problem solved. We can all go home now. Oops, wait a minute. What exactly is consciousness in this context? That would be a very important thing to know. How can we possibly build a consciousness model unless we know what we mean when we say the word consciousness? Well, let's go back to the experts and find out, what is consciousness?
What is consciousness?
Well, consciousness is a very difficult thing to define.
What is a simple definition of consciousness?
What is consciousness? Where does it come from?
What is consciousness?
People have been trying to explain consciousness and try to figure out what exactly it is, what it means for us as human beings, why we even have it.
What is consciousness? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm going to give you an answer that you're not going to be happy with. And I'm not happy with it either. I just don't know what more to say about it at the moment.
On a simple way of defining it has to do with awareness, and in particular it has to do with awareness of the self. That's at least how we as human beings have self-consciousness, so that when we look in a mirror we recognize that it's ourselves that we're looking at and not some other person or some other animal.
There is one can use all kinds of other words: awareness, self-awareness, sentience, feelings, what people call qualia in philosophy. These just seem to me synonyms for it. They're not elucidating what's going on at the bottom of it. Let it suffice to say this. I'm putting myself back on the border again. The phenomenon of consciousness seems to me one of the points at which the collision between the scientific worldview and various anti-scientific worldviews are going to be the most acute. And it's exactly for this reason that I think it's an enormously important phenomenon.
I applaud the honesty and integrity and humility of these experts in admitting they have no idea what this consciousness is that we're talking about. But we really do need to know, so let's dig a little further. For example, is consciousness the same as self-consciousness, or the same as awareness, as Dr. Newberg suggested? Or is it the same as sentience, or feelings, or qualia, as Dr. Albert suggested? Maybe the dictionary can give us a good definition of consciousness in this context. In the Merriam-Webster-Dictionary.com, I found 5 definitions for consciousness. Let's take a look at those 5 definitions one at a time. Definition number 1 has 3 parts. It says, A, the quality or state of being aware, especially of something within oneself. B, the state or fact of being conscious of an external object, state or fact. And C, awareness, especially concern for some social or political cause. So this definition has a lot to do with awareness, both within oneself and without. But it really doesn't seem to fit what we're talking about on the other side of the field. The consciousness we're talking about is much more than just aware. It is making choices and decisions that we are not aware of. Let's go on to definition number 2. The state of being characterized by sensation, emotion, volition, or thought. Mind. No, the mind or emotions is not what we're looking for here either. Definition number 3. The totality of conscious states of an individual. Well, that may be getting a little closer, talking about totality, but it still doesn't help me understand what this consciousness is on the other side of the field. Definition number 4 is the normal state of conscious life, and that doesn't help at all. And definition number 5, the upper level of mental life of which the person is aware as contrasted with unconscious processes. First, we're definitely not talking about mental life here when it comes to the consciousness on the other side of the field. And then, in the experiments in Berlin with the left and right button, we certainly were not aware of the thing that was choosing our holographic experience. In fact, we didn't become aware of it for 6 seconds after the hologram had been chosen and downloaded to our brain. In fact, if anything, the choice of what experience we were about to have, pressing the left or right button, was definitely an unconscious process as far as we are concerned on this side of the field.
Absolutely, absolutely. It seems that there's a lot of unconscious brain activity going on that is shaping your decisions, and that your consciousness comes in at a very late stage.
So definition number 5 directly contradicts what we're looking for. Then I looked up self-consciousness and conscious and self-conscious, but nothing seemed to shed any light on this use of the word consciousness for whatever is on the other side of the field choosing the experiences we have. So, when in doubt, let's try the Wikipedia. Consciousness is a term that has been used to refer to a variety of aspects of the relationship between the mind and the world with which it interacts. It has been defined at one time or another as subjective experience, awareness, the ability to experience feelings, wakefulness, having a sense of selfhood, or as the executive control system of the mind. As we say in the United States, that makes everything as clear as mud. But the one thing I think we can agree on after all this is that the word consciousness has a lot of different definitions, different connotations, and different uses, which is why we are not making any progress in trying to find out exactly what this consciousness is on the other side of the field. V.S. Ramachandran is director of the Center for Brain and Cognition and professor with the Psychology Department and Neurosciences program at the University of California, San Diego, and adjunct professor of biology at the Salk Institute. Rama says, "We may be forced to admit that consciousness, like infinity and the particle wave concepts in quantum mechanics, is a property that cannot be made intuitively straightforward. Consciousness, like gravity, mass, and charge, may be one of the irreducible properties of the universe for which no further account is possible." Or, as someone on the internet once put it, a definition of consciousness is as difficult as someone asking you why you like what you like. We're calling this thing on the other side of the field consciousness because it seems to be aware and it is making choices and decisions, things we normally associate with our own consciousness. But then we use the same word, consciousness, for other things on this side of the field, like mind and awareness and mental life and wakefulness and selfhood, that have nothing to do with what's on the other side of the field. So I think it's clear no one really knows exactly what this consciousness is, especially in this context, or how to properly define it. Remember that radio in Part 1 that we took to a tribe in the Amazon? Eventually, they figured out that the music they heard had to be coming from sound waves in the air they couldn't see, and the radio was translating those sound waves into music. I assume they would also at some point later take the next step and ask, who was creating those sound waves? And who was choosing to broadcast certain sound waves on certain frequencies so that when they changed the dial, different music would come out? The natives might actually find out the answers to those questions one day, but unfortunately, we won't. We are incapable of knowing, and always will be incapable of knowing exactly what this consciousness is, simply because we are on this side of the field. And our brains, at least according to Carl Pribram, are designed as holographic receivers and translators, and have no capacity or ability to access or process any information on the other side of the field. So anything we might say about what goes on the other side of the field is simply speculation. Basically, no one seems to know what this consciousness is, and that's probably the most truthful thing we could say at this point. We only know that something, which we are calling consciousness for the moment, must exist on the other side of the field that is choosing our experiences and downloading them to our brains. What we can do is build a model based on the scientific evidence we have at hand and see how well it works. So let's briefly review what we know from the science to be true to this point. Consciousness, whatever that is, chooses certain wave frequencies that it wants from the infinite number of possibilities in the field, downloads those specific frequencies to a human brain, which translates them into a holographic 3D total immersion movie by collapsing the wave function, and then projects that movie out there for us to experience as our reality. We have now arrived at a point halfway through this 5-part series of workshops, and we have also reached the limits of what quantum physics can tell us at the present time. But a few minutes ago I said we were going to build a model based on quantum physics and the latest brain research to test certain theories of how this holographic universe might work, contrary to everything we've been taught to date. And we can still do that. After all, we're just playing with a model. This isn't rocket science. But we're going to have to switch now from quantum physics to metaphysics. And I want to be honest with you. I said in the beginning of Part 1 that you would not be listening to my theories or my beliefs or my opinions. And that's been true to this point. I have let you hear all of this directly from the experts themselves. That is changing now. As I discuss this consciousness model that many of us have been using and testing for the last few years, it will include some of my own theories based on my research and experience, along with input from others. However, whatever model we build must conform to and be consistent with all the scientific evidence we have to date. This is a prerequisite for any model anyone builds. The first step we need to take is come up with a working definition for this thing we are calling consciousness. Not only a definition, but a new name, so we don't keep confusing it with our own consciousness on this side of the field. We need something specific and clear, even if it's a guess at this point. Something to base this model on. Something we all understand what we mean when we say that consciousness is the thing that is creating our holographic experiences. So maybe it's time to try another approach. It often works well that when we can't figure out what something is, we can start eliminating what we know it is